Good day. Welcome to another Bible study from the cabin. So grateful that you are back with us for another day. Today just happens to be day 32 in the Whole50 Bible study. We are now throttling quickly towards the very end of the study. If you've been with us from the very beginning, it's good to have you back for another day. And if you're just maybe joining us or happened to cross for the ride, it's good to have you here. You've not missed much, but we're glad to have with us from here, maybe even forward. You can find out more information by clicking that link that's attached to this post, and you can get all the readings and information for the rest of this study. Today, we are still in the Old Testament. Again, Psalm 139, Psalm the longest book in the Bible, a collection of songs of many types, and today's study is God's Omnipresence. Before we get there, though, a couple of things I want to remind you of. If you are watching this live or close to the time that it aired, then I would like to invite you to join Sally and I and the rest of the Christ Table ministry for a Sunday morning in-person gathering this Sunday, May 9th, out at Carlin Park in Jupiter, Florida. If you're in South Florida, we'd love to come. We'd love to have you come and be a part of that. 11 a.m. is when we are meeting there. We'll still have our online gathering at 9:45 right here where you're watching this as well. So we'd love to have you watch that. If you're not in South Florida, but if you are in South Florida, consider coming out and being a part of what we have going on. If you have given up on God or disillusioned with God or the church, don't have a church home, then we'd love to have you come and check out and be a part of what we're doing. We also have our first in-person gathering coming up in northeastern Ohio. And so if you are in the Ohio or western PA area, then we'd love to invite you to come and be a part of what we're doing on May 16th at Daniels Park in Willoughby, Ohio, which is on the east side of Cleveland. I know there's like a east and west, Sharks and Jets, West Side Story thing going on in Cleveland. But we'll be over on the east side in Willoughby. Would love to have you come and be with us on May 16th, the Sunday at 11 a.m. That will be in person, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Also, May 17th, we begin a new Bible study, Party On, where we're going to look at food in the Bible. We're going to look at fasting and feasting and fellowship in the Bible. It's going to be a great study. Having put it together, I was just amazed at all of the interesting things that can be learned by simply looking at eating in Scripture. And I ended up having to cut a lot of things out of it because there was just so much material. And so I'd love to have you be a part of that. We're going to send these out in the mail at the end of this week because that study is starting very soon. So if you would like this study, we're sending it to all the people who are donors at christtable.today. So feel free to jump over there and donate, and we'll make sure to put a box of one or two of these studies together for you. But without any further delay, why don't we just go ahead and jump into today's study. Now, before I go into the reading, usually I start right into the Bible reading. I want to give a definition because I know that word omnipresence is a very big word that is perhaps primarily simply used by academics and pastors like me in order to describe something that most people maybe don't necessarily understand. So omnipresence is a word that is used to characterize a character trait or an attribute of God. The word omni means all, and then obviously presence. So omnipresence means all presence or all present. What that means is simply, and I've put it up here on the screen for you, that the presence of God anywhere and everywhere all at the same time. And so the implication here is that God is not bound like a human to being located in one place at one time, but he can be in all places at all times. And so that is omnipresence, and that is essentially what Psalm 139 verses 1 through 12 describes. And so why don't we just go ahead and jump right in? Oh Lord, the songwriter, who happens to be David here, King David, writes, "You have examined my heart, and you know everything about me. You know when I sit down, you know when I stand up. You know my thoughts, even when I am far away. Verse 3, you see me when I travel. You see me when I rest at home. You know everything that I do. You know what I'm going to say even before I say it, Lord. You go before me and follow me. You place your hand of blessing on my head. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too great for me to understand. Now, the word wonderful here, I would say, isn't necessarily a bad translation of the word. The word that is in view here is actually a very rare word. The word wonderful in Hebrew is only found one other place in the Bible, and that is in Judges. And this word, well, let me tell you, probably a better definition than the word, or translation than the word wonderful here, would be complex, complicated, difficult to understand. So maybe think back, and if you found English difficult, then perhaps if you diagrammed sentences or had to understand the difference between adjectives and adverbs and nouns and verbs and clauses, independent clauses, dependent clauses, all of those things, it began to get complicated for you and difficult and complex. And it was just kind of beyond what your mind could comprehend. If math wasn't your thing, then maybe it was geometry or algebra or story problems, or at some point, 2 + 2 = 4 turns into a situation mathematically that's just too difficult for you to understand. E = mc². All of these things that other people seem to know or comprehend, you don't. And so what's being said here is that for humanity, the knowledge of God or the attributes of God, his character, what makes God who he is just, it's a story problem. It's an English situation. It's like a foreign language to you. It's too complex, too complicated for you to fully comprehend. Your mind just isn't capable enough to do the problem. It's like using a DOS computer to try and use Photoshop, and that was like a real niche statement there. But imagine trying to use a computer from 20 or 30 years ago, heck, 2 or 3 years ago, to try to do the things that you can do on a computing device today. It's too difficult to understand. The iPhone, try to explain to someone 50 years ago that you're going to be able to hold something in your hand that's not connected with a wire to anything, to talk to somebody on the other side of the planet real time by video. It's too beyond their ability to understand. Now, that might think, when I look at my iPhone, I think, I don't think complex. I think wonderful. I think how exciting, how amazing, how incredible, how much this has changed my life. And so that's why the New Living Translation translators use the word wonderful here, is because to them it is a positive thing that God is so other, so different, so unable for us to comprehend, because all of those things that we're not able to comprehend in their mind are positive things. But for some of us, that is really super scary. It's not wonderful. And so maybe translating this, such knowledge is too complex for me to understand. Maybe translating this, such knowledge is too incomprehensible for me. Such knowledge is a bit terrifying for me, would also be an equally acceptable translation to the word wonderful. I can never escape from your spirit. To some people, that's a really positive thing, to never be able to escape from a God who is all present, who's omnipresent. For some of us, that's a little terrifying. God, I can't escape from you. I can't ever get away from your presence. I'm not sure I like this. I want to be in hiding. I don't want you to see everything. I don't want you to always be around. But the songwriter says, if I go up to heaven, God, you're there. If I go down to the grave, you're there. If I ride the wings of the morning, if I dwell by the farthest oceans, even here your hand will guide me and your strength will support me. And so the songwriter says, no matter what your internal hang up is with God's presence, no matter whether that brings you peace or whether that brings you pain, the thought of God always being everywhere, the reality is that God is really there to guide you, and God's strength is there to support you. And so that should bring you peace, the songwriter says. That should bring you hope, the songwriter says to you. That should give you the comfort of knowing that God's, no matter where you are, the farthest ocean, in the morning, in the evening, in the heavens, or even in the grave, God is still there alongside of you, ready to be a service to your deepest needs, your greatest fears, and whatever the present suffering that you find yourself in. To the psalmist, that's a good thing. And so maybe if God's omnipresence is terrifying to you, maybe the difficulty or the problem is we've misunderstood God. And so we have this fear of a God who doesn't really exist, because that's not the God who lives in reality. This is what the songwriter, the psalmist, David, is trying to say to us. I could ask the darkness to hide me and the light around me to become night, but even in darkness I cannot hide from you. To you the night shines as bright as the day, and darkness and light are the same to you. And this is where we'll hit pause. In the ancient Near East, darkness was thought to be evil. Darkness was thought to be a place where God did not or could not exist. Total darkness. And so the alternative to that is light. And this was the more they thought about it, was that light was a metaphor or a symbol of God. Anywhere there was light, there was God, and anywhere where there was darkness, there wasn't God. And so the songwriter here is actually kind of pressing up against the cultural idea of the day and saying, this isn't necessarily right. Because he says, I could ask the darkness to hide me if I wanted to get away from God, and the light around me to become night. So I could try to go to a place of full and complete darkness, which those who are reading this would say, as they're reading this, oh, you're trying to find a place that is completely and utterly without God. And then the songwriter throws the hook and says, but even in darkness, I can't hide from you. Your theology, everybody, is wrong. Even in darkness, God is still there. To God, the night shines as bright as the day. Darkness and light are the same to God. So in darkness, there's not less of God's presence or less of his ability to see you. He still sees you. He's still there with you. And rather than bringing fear or pain, that should bring hope, and that should bring comfort to you. Now, just really kind of one simple thing I want to point out here, and then I'm looking forward to hearing in the comments for the rest of the day, and whenever you watch this, what you see and hear. But one thing here, and this is a technical term. I don't often pull out technical terms, but I'm going to pull out a technical term here today. A merism, probably just totally butchered that word. A merism is a poetic technique that expresses a totality by mentioning two parts, typically polar opposites. So it's kind of saying that rather than saying God is always there, you would say that God is both on my left and on my right. Rather than saying God is everywhere, you would say that God is in the heavens and God is in the grave. And so it's using two things that are opposites in order to poetically describe something. And so if we were to, and let me click back here, go back to some of these initial verses. Lord, you've examined my heart. Verse 2, you know, and here's the opposites. Here's the merism. You know when I sit down or when I stand up. You know my thoughts even when I'm far away. You see me when I travel, when I'm out and about. You see me when I'm at home. You know what I'm going to say even before I say it. You go before me and you're behind me. You follow me. Such knowledge is too wonderful or too incomprehensible for me to understand. And so essentially what the poet has said, what the songwriter has said through this entire 12 verses here in Psalm 139 is God is everywhere, over and over and over again. God is always there, sitting down, standing up, whether you're traveling, whether you're at home. So he's given these opposite situations and painted this picture that God is always there. And I think if we reflect back through our life, in a lot of ways, that's going to give us a lot of peace to know that in those moments of suffering and difficulty that God is there with us. And I got to be honest and say, for some of the situations in my life, at least, when I look back on them, it can bring some frustration and some pain and some anger. God, you were there? Where were you? Why didn't I feel you? Why didn't you fix that situation? Why didn't you take care of that? And that's why I think that we can't just solely hang our hats on this one attribute of God, his omnipresence. It's important, but it hangs in the balance with all of God's other attributes. I can't answer some of those questions because I don't see the whole picture. And so I have to trust, I have to have faith that because God was there, somehow or other, he was working in a way that was best for me and for him, for good to come out of it, if not maybe in the moment or in the way that I saw it or wanted it to be. Because I also believe that not only is God omnipresent, but also believe that God is love, that God is a compassionate God, that God works for our good and works for his good, not to bring harm, but to bring hope. And so at the end of the day, for me, because I believe those other things about God on the basis of this, nothing about us that should say is or can be hidden from God. And for me, that brings peace. And if it doesn't bring peace for you, it's not as though you're wrong or you need to fix that. You can't help the way that you feel. But I would encourage you to maybe begin to go on a journey of trying to understand who God really is. Because the God whom you fear or want to hide from may not actually exist. And so maybe the best thing that I can encourage you to do is to continue on this Bible study with us if that's where you are, the Whole50. And we'll be back with you again tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time, or whenever you're able to get to it in the archive. But until that time, happy reading.